Hello there, Gary Stearman. Time for another commentary. It's been a while. I've missed you guys, but we're going to be trying to do as many of these as we can in days upcoming, because I don't know whether you've noticed or not, but history seems to be picking up speed a little bit. We're going to be talking about the events of the latter days. Of course, Christians for the last century or so have been opening their newspapers. They have been looking at events in Israel. For example, when General Allenby rode into Jerusalem on the 24th of Kislev, that's, of course, Hanukkah, in the year 1917, liberating what was then called Palestine, and beginning a series of events that led to the return of the Jews after World War II, people began to watch the news. Now, I'm not very big on what's called newspaper exegesis. That is to say, reading the papers, and these days, of course, that would be the internet, and watching television, and trying to peg signs that would indicate to us that the rapture is closer than it was the day before. Well, of course, it's closer than it was the day before, because we are approaching that time, and we know it for several reasons. First of all, there is, in our era, what the Bible refers to as the acceleration of perilous times. That would be 2 Timothy chapter 3, where Paul is talking to Timothy, and he talks about these perilous times, insane times. We've mentioned this over and over again for the last 3 or 4 decades, but what are insane times? They are times when people return from the regular order of, for example, a Republican federation of states that operate under a constitution and laws. We're drifting away from that. We're drifting toward pagan tribalism, which Paul calls perilous times. Men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, blasphemers, disobedient to parents. You know the drill. We've read these things many, many times before. We're seeing a return to pagan tribalism, which always happens at the end of a run of democracy, if you will, when men regulate their activities according to laws, and after a while that begins to be tiresome, and they return to paganism of one form or another. But at the same time, we're seeing what's mentioned in Zechariah 12. It's called the burden of the word of the Lord for Israel. Now, when Israel is prophesied about, it's always a twofold sort of thing in which Israel is praised and Israel is remembered as God's chosen people, but at the same time, Israel is remembered as a nation that sinned. And so prophets refer to Israeli prophecy as a burden. Behold, the burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens, layeth the foundation of the earth, formeth the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. And of course, we've been watching this all of my life, and evangelical Christians going all the way back to the late 19th century began to predict that Israel would return. And of course, when you read Zechariah 12, it speaks of the physical salvation of Judah, in which Jerusalem will be reestablished. It hasn't happened yet, but it's looking like it may happen very soon as the capital of Israel. And then there will be a series of wars, says Zechariah, in which the governors of Israel will be victorious. The physical salvation of Judah will be followed by the spiritual salvation of Judah, which will be tumultuous, to say the least. And here is the way Zechariah describes it. I'll pour out upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplications, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him, as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. In other words, there will be the physical salvation of Jerusalem, of Judah, of Israel, followed by the spiritual salvation of Judah, which indeed will return the rule of the kingdom, but not until a great number of cataclysmic events have occurred. Zechariah 12:11 says, "In that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddon." And back in Chronicles, you read about the terrible, terrible war that happened at that time. So we've got a lot ahead of us. We watch very carefully. I look at news items, like I have a few gathered here, and I wasn't sure at the beginning of this which ones I would read, but here's a quote from our Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, who spends a lot of time describing what he calls the brutal war in Syria, which seems endless. Now, you go to the northern border of Israel, you look to the north, and you're looking sort of over the lowlands, and you can look into the area of Hezbollah and north toward Damascus. And Dan Coates says so far 465,000 people have been killed in recent wars, 1 million injured, 12 million, that's half the pre-war population, are displaced persons. They have no place to live. We're talking about 12, 13 million plus 465,000 people killed. Wow. Just stop and think about that. And by the way, as you think about it, here's another news item showing Benjamin Netanyahu standing up and waving a piece of a drone that was shot down by an Israeli helicopter. And we read this in the Times of Israel. Brandishing a fragment of an Iranian drone downed over northern Israel a week ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said last Sunday, this was Sunday before last as I'm talking, that Israel could strike the Islamic Republic directly and cautioned Tehran not to test Israel's resolve. And as he waved this piece of an I should say, not an Israeli drone, but an Iranian drone, he said, "Mr. Zarif, do you recognize this? Well, you should. It's yours. You can take back with you the message to the tyrants of Tehran. Do not test Israel's resolve." Those are the words of Benjamin Netanyahu. And I could pull out I don't know how many more news items like this. And again, I would caution against newspaper exegesis, that is, trying to decide how long it's going to be until the rapture by watching news events in Israel, because people have been doing that now for decades, and it never works. We do not set dates. When will the next war begin? I'm holding here a news item, February 23rd, 2018, from Isra Pundit, and we have here a quotation which I think is very interesting. Major General Yaakov Amrador, and he's a senior fellow for the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies, makes a statement here that I find interesting concerning Syria and Syria's client warriors. He says, since Israel is no longer dealing with countries, but rather organizations, deterrence ahead of a large-scale operation has become ever more complicated to achieve. And what he's saying here, and I could read the whole article, but if you want to read it, it's in Isra Pundit of the 14th of February 2018. What Major General Coates is saying is this: no, we're not at war. In fact, Israel is not at war with any given nation, not with Russia, not with Turkey, not with Syria, not with the Saudis, not with the Jordanians, not with anybody, but rather clients that have gathered themselves in the name of states. And there is a low intensity ebb and flow of power in the region, punctuated every now and then by major outbreaks. And nobody can predict when the big one is going to happen. And that's what essentially is being said by Major General Yaakov Amrador. He's saying Israel is not fighting countries anymore. Israel is fighting organizations, fluid gatherings of warriors. By the way, the Russians are among them in Syria. You may have seen on one or more cable news outlets that 9 Russian soldiers were found dead in Syria. Others say it's more like 300 Russian soldiers dead in Syria, just off of Israel's northern border. What are the Russians doing there? Kind of reminds us of Gog, the land of Magog, in Ezekiel 38. The Russians are there right now. What are they doing? They're acting on behalf of various client states, again, in these loose gatherings of, not of countries, but of organizations, Hezbollah, PLO, and various other organizations ranging from those in Turkey to those in Saudi Arabia. And so we watch and we say, how long can it be? Zechariah 12, behold, I'll make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. Well, since President Donald Trump announced that the embassy, American embassy, was going to be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and that further he would work at making Jerusalem the capital of Israel, everybody's been on an increasingly high alert state. But that's simply one of many, many, many fulfillments of the prophecy of Zechariah 12:2. Behold, I'll make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. All these things we watch and we're very interested in them. Here's one that I find amazing. And this comes from the Times of Israel. The date is February 23rd, 2018. Israel's oil in Golan, Megiddo, Jezreel in the valley. You know where the valley of Jezreel is in north central Israel, not far from Haifa. And here's the opening of this fascinating story. While all these events of war are happening, alerting us to the fact that we are living in a climactic period of time, you get a tidbit like this one. Recently, there have been reports that Afek Oil and Gas, a subsidiary of the American company Genie Energy, have discovered an oil bonanza in the Golan Heights with potential of billions of barrels. Now, people have been talking about Israel discovering oil for decades because prophecy says that in the last days, Israel is going to discover oil. In fact, a number of very powerful American companies have been drilling in Israel for a long time on that basis. But again, Israel's chief geologist, Yuval Batav, said that the layer that has been recently discovered is 350 meters thick, 10 times larger than the average oil find worldwide. And what's important to know is that there is oil in this rock. And so people who have been prophecy watchers for years know all about Asher, the prophecy right at the end of the books of Moses. And it's in Deuteronomy 33:24. And of Asher, he said, let Asher be blessed with children, and let him be acceptable to his brethren. Let him dip his foot in oil. This is a prophecy for the tribe of Asher. Well, guess where Asher's territory is? Exactly in the territory that we've been reading about, where this major oil discovery has been made. But hey, there's nothing new in this. People, for as long as I've been studying prophecy and before, have said, hey, Asher is going to discover oil. That is the area or the tribal allocation of Asher in Israel. The 25th verse says, thy shoes shall be iron and brass, and as thy days, so shall thy strength be. And everybody who has ever looked at this says, Asher's going to discover oil and his shoes are going to be iron and brass. Speaking of perhaps the drilling tools that it will take to get down to that oil. Well, Here it is in the times of Israel, OPEC Oil and Gas, which, by the way, is a subsidiary of an American company, has discovered not just an oil find, but a huge oil find. What else tells us what time it is? Well, I don't have time to follow this one up except for the headline. WorldNet Daily, under Islamic repression, Christianity has ignited like a flame. And the opening sentence in this article is a question. Has Iran taken on a fight that it can never win? Iran, a nation that has exported terrorism for decades, has the free world worried about its nuclear weapons program, routinely threatens to destroy Israel, interferes with the Middle East conflicts, engages in cyber war against the West. By the way, the Iranians are very, very smart when it comes to computer technology, the internet, cyber warfare. But the meat of this article is the American Center for Law and Justice reports Christianity has ignited like a flame across the country of Iran, making the Iranian government so nervous they're desperate to extinguish it quickly. Iranians are converting to Christianity at a record-setting pace with an estimated 360 to 800,000 Christians in the country. There were fewer than 500 back in the 1980s. Isn't that amazing? And what I find very ironic is that our own blessed nation, the United States of America, is falling away from Christianity, someplace under Islamic repression to the maximum, like Iran. Wow. People are coming to Christ in record numbers, 360 to 800,000 new Christians, and who knows how they even arrived at those numbers. I suspect that the move may be even much bigger. Now, those of us who are prophecy watchers have to ask the question. And here's the question. What is this going to do to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy? Nobody, as far as I know, has ever calculated the effect that a Christian revival will have on Old Persia, which is mentioned prominently in latter-day prophecy. And yet, somehow, this is applying a particular kind of pressure that's going to manifest itself in an outpouring and fulfillment of latter-day Bible prophecy. My point in reading all of these, this variety of news releases today is this. You cannot look at a composite set of news releases and calculate the time of the Lord's return, much less the time of battles that are going to break out in the Middle East. For the last 4 decades, I have been watching. I've been speaking with other Christians literally around the world. We've all been trying to calculate and understand prophetic scripture in such a way that we could teach it to other people. And I think the very wise among us have come to realize that only the Lord has the vaguest idea of when all this is going to come to a climactic conclusion. The rapture of the church? You can't date it. Could happen today. Literally. You've heard people say that before, and you're saying, yeah, I've heard that before. Tell me something that'll cheer me up. I'll tell you something that'll cheer you up. The Lord loves you, and he's going to take you to be with himself for eternity, and he's got a job for you that will be better than any job you've ever had in your life. By the way, what I always tell my friends is when you go to heaven, you're going to discover it's the first place you've ever been where the clothes actually fit. I'm looking forward to it. It's a reality in my mind. And by the way, we're going to keep watching the news. You keep watching too. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.